Good afternoon. Welcome to NeoConnect 2020. NeoConnect is NeoCon's online series of resources, programming, and events designed to connect the community throughout the month of June. I'm Beth Hicks, Managing Director of Marketing for the Design Center at the Merchandise Mart, and I want to thank you for joining us. Today's session, presented by the Design Center, is approved for 1 IDCEC credit for interior designers and 1 AIA LU for architects. You can find details on CEU credits at the bottom of your screen in just one moment. Questions will be addressed at the last 10 minutes of the presentation, but please feel free to enter questions at any time in the Q&A icon, either at the bottom or top of your screen. The presenter will answer as many questions as they have time for. So today's presentation is No Place Like Home, Catalyzing Creativity for Resimercial Design at Home and Work. In this session, Donald Ratner will discuss the migration of work to home during the COVID pandemic and how it has accelerated the long-standing erosion of boundaries between workplace and domestic environments. A synthesis of commercial and residential elements, Resimercial design is said to boost creativity and innovation among other benefits. But what is the evidence for this claim? Have specific characteristics of home environments been proven to enhance idea flow? And is Resimercial design applicable to home-based workplaces as well? This presentation explores the science behind the new philosophy and how building professionals can advocate for a Resimercial approach on an informed rather than intuitive basis. Architect Donald M. Ratner draws a scientific research to help individuals and organizations maximize creativity in the workplace, residential, wellness, hospitality, and retail environments. Educator and author as well as practitioner, Ratner's most recent book is My Creative Space, How to Design Your Home to Stimulate Ideas and Spark Innovation. Please join me in welcoming Donald Ratner.
Well, thank you, Beth. Let me press some buttons here. Oops, sorry. Okay, having a little bit of technical difficulties. Let's see if I can clear this up. Here we go. All right, everybody see my screen, I hope. All right, so welcome everybody. I think, when we talk about this concept of Resimercial design, and I'm glad, Beth, you took some of the description for the program as part of your introduction. I would only mention that the word Resimercial is not actually an official word. That is, you will not find it in any dictionary, any thesaurus, at least not as of yet. I think in time it will enter the official lexicon, but until then, of course, we understand that this is a mashup, a combination of two words, residential and commercial, and as Beth explained, it generally refers to the practice of incorporating aspects of home in commercial interior design, including the workplace, which is where I'm going to be focusing most of my commentary today. Now, Resimercial design has been a pretty hot topic in the industry for the last, let's say, 3 or 4 years or so. And one reason for its popularity is that it benefits both employer and employee in various ways, among them, as Beth mentioned, by boosting creativity amongst those occupying such environments. Now, one sense of this is that that's a kind of logical outcome to this particular fact, which is according to data, according to surveys that we have, we actually tend to get more good ideas at home than in any other setting. So the logic is if you make the workplace more like the domestic environment, presumably creative performance will follow suit. But I think as design and building professionals, we want to probe a little deeper to understand why home is such a powerful idea engine and which qualities of home can be adapted to the workplace to achieve these higher levels of creative performance. Now, as Beth mentioned in the introduction, we are, of course, living in a COVID era and hopefully in a post-COVID era, not too long from now. So you might be wondering, well, how is it that we can just talk about the workplace as if nothing's changed in these last few months? Well, don't worry about that because I'm not going to. And as Beth mentioned, among my goals today is to show how Resimercial design could be key, in fact, to restoring confidence in the workplace as a viable setting in which to gather for common purpose. Another goal I have in this talk is to help you learn how to shape the home for optimal creative output, given that remote work is clearly here to stay as well. So all of this presumes that there's a relationship that exists between creativity and physical space. And that relationship, I would suggest, can be analyzed through one of three frameworks. The first framework examines built space as an object of creativity, a kind of three-dimensional canvas on which we can exercise our imaginations. The second looks at space as a container of creativity, a place that shelters creative pursuits, whether those are done for personal or professional reasons. But the approach I'm going to take in this talk falls in a third category, one that's a little less traveled than the first two. And this category explores physical space as a catalyst of creativity. So if you want to maybe reach back to your 11th grade chemistry class, you'll remember that catalyst means something, an agent, that causes an event to happen without itself being affected. So in the context of this talk, the catalyst in question is physical space in both its material and ambient characteristics. The event we'll be looking at is a boost in creative performance. So one reason this framework is a little less common than the others is that it's only recently that we've even become aware that the built environment can have this effect on us. But if we look back in time, we can identify certain key milestones that would eventually lead us to our present understanding. And the first of these happens in the, say, first half of the 20th century. It actually happens twice, and it comes in the form of something that no other than Sir Winston Churchill, of all people, said at a couple of points in his life, which is this: we shape our buildings and afterwards our buildings shape us. Some of you may have come across this before. So what did Sir Winston mean by this statement? Well, I think the first half is pretty straightforward. We shape our buildings. We, of course, are people. There's no great mystery there. But it's the second half where things get a little more intriguing. Afterwards, our buildings shape us. Well, how do they shape us? How do we know they're shaping us? And what are they shaping us into? It would be another, say, quarter century, 25 years or so, but eventually science would turn its attention to answering those questions. And when it did so, it came in the form of a discipline known as environmental psychology. So environmental psychology is pretty much what it sounds like. It is the study of how the built and natural environments influence how we as people think, feel, and act. It is the science of person-to-place interaction. And as I say, it starts to coalesce as a kind of standalone discipline. This would be the late 1960s, 1970 or so, but we're going to jump ahead again to the auspicious year of 1984 when, among other things, a groundbreaking experiment takes place that I think really sets the table nicely for everything we're going to talk about this afternoon. So this experiment was conceived and executed by, at the time, a young medical biologist named Roger S. Ulrich, who was at the University of Delaware. And although trained as a medical biologist, he was particularly interested in the relationship between healthcare facilities and human well-being. So based on a childhood experience he had, he conceives this experiment, travels north to a town about an hour west of Philadelphia called Paoli, Pennsylvania, where there was and still is a pretty sizable hospital institution. And obviously with the cooperation of the hospital administrators, proceeds to undertake this study. Now, you need to do take a number of steps to conduct a study of this sort, one of which is to identify your subjects. So in this case, you don't just, or really in any scientific experiment, you don't just pull people in off the street willy-nilly. You want to find a population that's as consistent and homogeneous as possible because you don't want individual idiosyncrasies to skew the results. So all of Ulrich's subjects had to fit certain criteria. First of all, they were all patients at the hospital. They were all there within roughly the same period of time. They were all in for exactly the same surgical procedure. It happens to be gallbladder surgery if you're taking close notes. But most important to our discussion is that they all stayed in identical rooms in one particular wing of the hospital on the second and third floors of that wings, and all of these rooms were situated on one side of the corridor, which means that everybody, all the patients, while they were in their hospital room, were laying in bed, they were all looking out the window in the same direction. There was one really and only one really different aspect of their environments, and that was what they actually saw through the window. Roughly half the group, when they looked out, they looked straight into the canopies of trees. A couple of trees having been planted in a courtyard just outside the wing or up on the second and third floor, so they have a perfect, shot right into the foliage. The other half, let's say people farther down the corridor, when they looked out, they had a clear shot across the courtyard, and they faced where they saw a blank brick wall of another part of the hospital. So the question that Ulrich asked himself was, did the difference in view have any impact on patient outcomes? So he's pulling records, he's collating data, he's crunching numbers, and lo and behold, he finds there were indeed several striking differences between these two groups. Those who saw the foliage of trees had shorter hospital stays, required less medication, and exhibited fewer complications than those who saw the blank brick wall. So let that sink in for a moment. We are talking about something in the environment, meaning external to the human body, having absolutely nothing to do with the medical care they were receiving, nonetheless, literally altering the course of the healing process, their core physiology. The power of the environment to influence how we think, feel, and act cannot get any more profound than that. So scientists have a name for this phenomenon. They call it brain priming. So brain priming consists of first an input, that means some kind of sensory stimulus entering human consciousness through one of the five senses, sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, where it then triggers some kind of output, some kind of change of condition, change of behavior. In Ulrich's case, that input would be the view through the window, the output, an improvement in human wellness. Now, in this talk, I'm going to be talking about, or I'm going to be looking at a specific, call it subcategory of brain primes. I call them design triggers. Why? Because as in the case of Ulrich's experiment, everything about this environment was the result of human agency, right? Was the result of human deliberate actions. Nothing was there by chance, nothing was there pre-existing, nothing was there accidentally. That's what we mean by design, not only the sort of aesthetic aspect to it, but things done with deliberate knowledge. And so of course that means that everything could have been different from how things were. So Ulrich's paper is published, as I say, in 1984. It creates quite a conversation, obviously, within the healthcare industry, within the design industry that services that sector, but it kind of raises an obvious follow-up question, which is to say, okay, if Ulrich were able to identify one positive correlation between input and desired outcome, well, what about all the other aspects of interior space? What about color, materials and finishes, artwork, lighting, furnishings? Could we not repeat this methodology over and over again, only in each case isolate a different variable and see if we can determine whether there are positive or negative connections between them? And that's exactly what has happened in the, let's say, what now, 36 plus years since Ulrich's experiment, to the point where it has certainly contributed to, if not morphed into, a design strategy, call it, or approach known as evidence-based design, EBD. If one would like to learn more about this subject, we've obviously just been able to kind of skim across the top. Well, a couple of resources I could point you to, myself is one of them. That's where you can reach me. What I'm happy to do is to post the slides. I know there was a lot coming at you in a relatively quick order. I can post these slides online in a few days, and if you're interested in getting a copy of them, please reach out to me at this address. I believe Beth will also be putting on an abbreviated, abridged form recording of the talk as well. There's also my website where there's quite a few resources in this field of creative space making, among them books, including, of course, my own, which you see on the left. And with that, I thank you all for listening. Okay, exhale. If you all want to write it in, clap on your comment or Q&A, that's fine too. Or just think it, you don't have to write it in. So now I understand I'm going to handle the Q&A. So let me open that up. And I will go through them and answer them the best I can in the time we have remaining. All right. We have a question here. Did the research on creativity include variables for culture? Are these significant? Yes, interesting question. Yes, a good example of that one would involve color. So color operates on 3 levels. One I would call the universal. So the colors blue and green, especially blue, which is apparently the world's most popular color. That's pretty universal. That crosses national cultural boundaries. Everybody loves blue. And I think the same can be said of green to varying degrees. The second level, I would say, is the sort of personal. So like if you grew up in a purple bedroom and you had a very happy childhood, very good chance you're going to see purple as a positive color, regardless of what the research says, and that might be a positive cue for you to put you in that kind of positive affect mindset. Whereas, let's take black. Black in Chinese culture is a good luck color, whereas in Western culture, we tend to associate, of course, with funereal, as funereal associations, and so forth. So there we are seeing a difference. So yes, culture can play into this to some degree, depending on what primes we're talking about. Okay, what are some key features to keep in mind when implementing a resimercial design? Ooh, well, there's a lot of them, as I think I have now sort of at least introduced you to. It really covers every gamut, really everything from obviously the visible aspects of the space, but even things like planning. We didn't talk quite about that. Programming, obviously, we did. It goes on and on. So I would just, urge you to kind of dig into it further, because there's nothing that can't be put through that, almost nothing, I should say, that can't be put through that filter. What are some questions to ask when specifying a residential brand for a commercial space? Well, that gets into kind of a more production end of things. The thing about Resimercial is it's not that you can just, haul a product designed for residential use into a commercial space. You've got issues of durability, health, safety, welfare, other aspects of it. That's what Resimercial, commercial design is about. It's trying to merge the look, the feel, the qualities, at least when it comes to products, of a residential environment with commercial manufacturing standards, etc. So I would just be careful about literally, specifying something from one environment to the other. Without understanding that relationship. Are Resimercial design principles here to stay, or is it just a trend? Well, that I think is what I'm trying to get at. I think it's moved from being a trend to a potentially almost, get too melodramatic, life-saving aspect for the workplace in the years to come, because the effects, even after vaccines are introduced, hopefully in the not too distant future, I think these effects are going to linger. And Resimercial, or the sense of having a residential quality and its aspects of safety and contentment and happiness, are just so deeply ingrained that it's likely to be with us for a good long time. But of course, a long time, or forever, is a very, very long time, and who knows where things will go in the future. How do you recommend we as listeners proceed from here? Well, I think that was an earlier question, so I hope I gave you some clues. There's an enormous amount of research out there. I've tried to bring a lot of it together in my book and in my writings that are around the internet. So, just dig, it's there. How do you think co-working creative spaces in the new open office trend? Yes, that's a big question about open office. That was already a question, obviously, before we got into this whole pandemic situation. It's a very complicated issue, but we seem to be moving back towards a more segregated office environment, which on some levels does run a little bit counter to the idea of certainly creative collaboration, because creativity on a business workplace level does involve, generally speaking, more than one person. In fact, innovation, some people would define as kind of necessitates a group situation. So we're going to have to find ways that we can collaborate safely for the innovation-driven economy to continue. I'm looking at going to grad school for design, worrying about being remote, specifically creative learning innovation. How does this apply to learning? Well, I think just more broadly that, and this is a point to be taken generally, that nearly all of these tactics that we're talking about are equally applicable to learning environments, workplace environments, to a great degree retail spaces, because they're really, dealing with fundamental human properties, characteristics of being human psychology. So if you want to create a learning environment that promotes creativity, implementing a lot of these techniques have been found to do exactly that. The remote issue, well, that's where creating your own space to applying these principles to them could help you just amplify your own ability to absorb these ideas and look at them with fresh eyes. What about location, areas where people can work outside more year-round? Yes, I definitely recommend working outside when you can. I do it myself. It is, of course, a great way to get into nature. It is a great way to expand that sense of spaciousness. Absolutely, you've got smells. We need nature inputs like a fish needs water. I mean, it just gets down to that. So to the degree that you can put yourself in an outdoor environment, absolutely ideal. Somebody's asking about purchasing the book on Amazon Kindle. So the good news is the book sold out, actually, its first printing after this whole business hit. But there are hard copies available pretty much only on Amazon. You just have to go into the third-party sellers under CEO buying options. So just flip over to hardcover, go into buying options. It should be there. If not, I'll make sure it is after we get off the session. So stand by. It is available in Kindle if you want, but it will be available momentarily in hard copy if it isn't. Any evidence for creative performance based on latitude, outdoor color temperature? Not sure what oh, you mean, well, sunlight. So cool in the morning and midday, then going to a more amber with late afternoon, setting sun. Absolutely. Color of daylight is totally attuned to our, obviously, whole circadian rhythms, our bodily processes and cognitive style. Yes, they generally find that the blue hours are best for creative work, whereas the late afternoon seems to be better for analytic work. These are broad brush findings. It varies from individual to individual. But absolutely, that's a whole subject in itself, obviously, getting into lighting, but more from the daylight perspective. Bottom line is bring as much daylight as possible into the interiors, and then, yes, calibrate your activities with time of day as well. Are there any circumstances where creativity would be undesirable to promote? Yes, absolutely. So if you're, so he's asking, is there any place where you wouldn't want to design towards improved creativity? I would say, yeah. Let's say you're a CPA and you crunch numbers for a living. You want to be maximized for analytical thinking. You want that right answer. You don't want to get too creative with somebody's tax returns. There's all sorts of ways or reasons why, yes, in an ideal workplace, you would have different space designed to some degree to different types of activities, different tasks, different cognitive tasks. Worship is interesting because I always associate ceiling height with the great Gothic cathedrals. So if you think about it, of course, that enormous amount of height, what is that doing? That is putting us into that abstract, non-specific, big picture, broad brush, whatever you want to call it, that state of mind that is very much aligned with the contemplation of God, which is the ultimate abstraction, of course. So that enormous ceiling height takes us out of ourselves, puts us into that abstract kind of mental processing style. It absolutely seems to go, to me at least, hand in hand. What is your
position? Thank you, Donald. Donald, okay. I'm sorry we are out of time for today, but thank you so much for your wonderfully informative presentation. I apologize we couldn't get to all the questions, but thank you so much for everyone who joined us today. And thank you for participating in NeoConnect. There is more information and more programming at designcenter.com and neocon.com. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, everybody.